someone on a related note, Brian Frederick asked, can Aaron give an update on the Bountygate issue? Because the last time you were on, we were talking about that.
It never goes away, and the latest is that, so Trump was interviewed about it, and he was asked if he brought up the bounties with Vladimir Putin. He said no, and he gave this clunky, answer, like buffoonish answer, as of course he did. And now everyone's seizing on it. But again, what everyone's forgetting in the outrage over Trump and not confronting Putin is that, ever since this story blew up, we've had a series of stories showing that the U.S. intelligence agencies were not in agreement on this, and that the agencies like the NSA and the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, had strong doubts. And just even if you don't even know that, the story itself is so absurd. The idea that the Taliban needed Russian money to kill Americans when they've been fighting there for 20 years. Also, the idea that if Russia was sending the Taliban money, that they do it via easily traceable wire transfers,
right.
And also, if this was such a huge, horrible and real plot, then Trump supposedly got this intelligence in late February. A lot of other people saw this too. So why didn't anybody come forward and say, oh my God, our president is ignoring intelligence that Russians are paying for the scalps of our troops? And the reason they didn't do that is not because everybody in the U.S. government is just a Putin puppet. It's because the intelligence wasn't confirmed. It was a claim. And by the way, it was a claim with such an obvious political motive that it was given to Trump right before he was about to take a major step forward in peace talks with the Taliban towards an eventual U.S. withdrawal. And the beauty of this whole Bountygate thing is that it's been successful in stopping that, because Liz Cheney, the Republican and daughter of Dick Cheney, led an effort in the House to pass a measure putting the brakes on a U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And it passed with Democratic assent. And that is just one of the magical features of Russiagate madness from the start, which is that it enlists Democrats in a hawkish, chauvinist agenda as their way of challenging Trump. It works beautifully. It works every single time. And no matter how naked the agenda is and how specious the story is and how much the evidence collapses, everybody still goes along with it. It's something to behold.
Yeah. Someone wrote that Mick Mindfulness, who moved my cheese, said the story was just covered. The story was just a cover to pass a bloated Pentagon budget. Why are we all talking about it? Well, we're still talking about it because that hasn't been exposed. That's newsworthy. That should be a story. And no one has done that work, even though, it was almost more direct than usual. I feel like that narrative was pushed, and then all of a sudden Liz Cheney does this. They didn't even wait that long.
No, it's it was beautiful. It
right?
Was Bountygate. Okay, Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
Let's get together with Jason Crow, who is a Democrat from Colorado, served in the military. He was one of the impeachment managers. He was telling everybody, during the impeachment trial, that Vladimir Putin wakes up every day thinking about ways to destroy American democracy. That's why we had to impeach Trump. And I'm so glad that Bernie Sanders, instead of campaigning in Iowa and South Carolina, that Bernie Sanders had to sit there and listen to that, because it was really important that we do that and listen to, Adam Schiff and Jason Crow talk about how Vladimir Putin wants to destroy us. Another great victory for Russiagate. And yeah, the agenda it serves is right in front of our faces. And, look, it's the way, think of how many people who fall for this. And because this has been shoved down our throats for 4 years as the way to quote unquote resist Trump, is by embracing this militarist anti-Russia chauvinism. And progressives have to think about the long-term consequences of this. I know in my case, people who follow me will know that I talk about Russiagate a lot. In fact, it's all I pretty much talk about. But
also Syria.
But it's all related.
And other stuff. You do Israel foreign policy stuff. Yeah, but it is all related.
Related. Yeah, it's because what Russiagate has done is that, it's taken a right-wing party, the Democratic Party, and pushed it even more to the right. And it's done it a big motive of Russiagate and of this militarism was to avoid being the party of Bernie Sanders and providing people with all the things that Bernie Sanders wants to give people at home, because if you have this constant thing about fighting foreign enemies and they're against this, that helps justify bloated Pentagon budgets. It also diverts attention. Like all of a sudden the expression of your resistance to Trump is not in like challenging his tax cuts or giving health care to everybody, but it's in getting him to confront Vladimir Putin about,
right.
this fake bounty plot,
Right.
So it's like there's a reason why it's not just because it's stupid and a distraction. It serves a very concerted agenda because, it's Democrats basically, it's their way to avoid becoming the party of Bernie Sanders, because
Right.
we can't, if we want all the things that we advocate at home, healthcare, education, jobs, housing, it's not going to happen until we restrain and stop the militarism that sucks up so much money and time abroad. And so it's, it's something to think about. Like, after I hope Biden wins, we're going to have to like basically elect Biden, but then defeat everything him and his allies stand for,
right.
if we actually want anything.
Yeah. And what is the motive? I mean, maybe this is a naive question, but what does Liz Cheney get out of this? I mean, is it like Halliburton contracts that her dad helped get, or?
As long as we have enemies, then weapons contractors make a lot of money, and then they help fund think tanks,
right,
which provide the intellectual framework for justifying these wars. So, I mean, it's just a racket. And then there's also like a psychological thing where you have to think about all these people as being really empty inside, all of them. Like for
literally Dick Cheney, like empty heart.
Yeah, well, there you go. Perfect example. Like Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And so psychologically, if you're empty inside and you have no soul and you have no morals, then you need something else to fill your void and justify your existence. And for them, it's this American exceptionalist idea that we're better than everybody else and that we have dominion over the entire planet. And so we have to do every step we take justifies our continued hegemony over everybody and our continued bullying. And of course, we think we're doing it in the name of democracy and human rights. But it's like it's an emotional and monetary and militaristic racket.
Right. Yeah. Brian Frederick writes, Democrats want a new Cold War with Russia. Republicans want a new Cold War with China.
Brian's right. And the sad thing is that Biden's like even competing with Trump as to who can, who can be like the most militarist on China as well. So Democrats have, like, Russia is their lane. Like they're claiming Russia, but Biden wants a piece of the China action too. He's like, there's an article today about Republicans. This is in the Daily Beast. I have it right here. Republican China hawks secretly approaching Team Biden. It's one part of an increasingly broad push to bring GOP officials under the Biden tent, So, it's effective. I mean, everyone's falling for it again, this is not my wheelhouse. So I'm cautious on what I say about China, but I really recommend people check out what my colleagues at the Gray Zone are doing, because they're pretty much one of the few outlets on the left that are like not accepting on faith all the claims that we are getting about China to justify sanctions and aggression and tough rhetoric. But it's amazing how effective it is and how people just get duped. Well-meaning people just get duped, and they every time into thinking that it must be true, but it's just not.
Yeah. Also, so just to clarify, Mick Mindfulness, who moved to Move My Cheese, responded to me. I guess the reason he thought it was an old story is I watched Jimmy Dore. That is why I thought it was an old story. He scoops everyone. Fair. Yeah.
He does.
Yeah. The backpack story. That's really funny.
The backpack story. Jimmy also was the first.
That's what I'm remembering. No, sorry.
But also, Jimmy is such a scooper that he was also the first to interview AOC.
Oh yeah,
he was on to AOC. Like, that's how ahead of the game Jimmy.
You're right. Yeah,
crazy. And of course, he called on the Syria thing. He was pushing back on that long before I did. Russiagate, and of course, if you watch the Jimmy Dore show, he will not let you forget any of that. You will know from Jimmy that he's been on this. He deserves. Right.
Yeah. And what was the backpack thing again? It was really.
Well, it's a video he plays of CNN where it's like the site of an alleged chemical attack, and the correspondent sniffs a backpack and is like, "Oh yeah, that smells like chemicals."
Sorry, it's like so ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, and also this is scary because it's weird that like people, even liberals, don't have this built into their heads more, that like a lack of skepticism over reports about chemical warfare or weapons or chemical weapons development, like that leads to war that we apparently don't want. Like the people who thought Iraq was bad, like a lot of people who are anti-Iraq war are skeptical. If they saw this story that you wrote, they would be skeptical of it.
They would. And, you know, that's because we live in a free society. So the government can't just do whatever it wants. It has to, it has to manufacture consent. And the way to do that when it comes to military intervention abroad is to lie to people and, you know, pull at their heartstrings and dupe people into thinking that this is a noble act to save people's lives. And this happens, you know, every single time. You know, the stories about Iraqi soldiers ripping babies from
incubators
in Kuwait. You know, Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi had given Viagra to his troops, and they were going to commit mass rape and mass murder in Benghazi. And every single time after the fact, all these claims are shown to be false. But we are such a propagandized society, and there, you know, for media outlets, like, you know, there's no like incentive to go against the grain. And if you do, you get marginalized and subjected to personal attacks. And so, you know, in a case like this, like no one has to tell you, like, don't cover these whistleblowers, don't cover these leaks. It just becomes ingrained as a habit because you know, like, you have to calculate, is this worth all the agony that I'm going to get? And for a lot of people, it's just not worth it. And also, if you know, if you want to be accepted into the establishment, into the liberal mainstream, you just know that there are certain red lines that you're not going to cross. And the way Syria has been covered and the way critics and skeptics of the narrative have been demonized, everyone just learns the lesson. And that's why, you know, there are very few people actually living up to the credo of adversarial journalism when it comes, you know, like unequivocally. And you know, you can count them on one finger. And that's why I appreciate anyone who hasn't, like, who still like lets, like you, Katie, like you're one of the few people with like a liberal adjacent platform who hasn't like joined in with the media blockade. And I really appreciate that, because a lot of places like Democracy Now! And The Intercept, and you can go on and on and on, have. And it's, you know, it's cowardice and careerism really is bad for journalism. It just is, but it's very effective. And it's very widespread.
Yeah, well, when we had Max on Useful Idiots, for instance, like so many people, they literally overtly tried to get the show canceled. And then they had a petition. And then so many people were like writing to me like privately and saying like, you know, thanks for having Max on, and I'm sorry you're getting all this shit. And I'd say something, but and it's like, I'm not, but of course, like the more people are afraid of it, the harder it is to stand up to it. It's like the same principle as like union organizing, you know, like power in numbers, safety in numbers. But it makes it harder.
And people, like you have to calculate, you know, like let's say like you have a cause that's dear to your heart. You have to calculate, well, is it worth me talking about Syria, which is not, I don't really know much about it anyway. It's not I don't live there. So is it worth the cost? And a lot of people, I mean, I get it why people get scared, but at a certain point, there are some people who I think who are protected enough,
that they could go there.
That they could go there. And by the way, when it comes to Max and appearing on your show, I mean, one of the things people were most upset about with Max in Syria is when he talked about this group, the White Helmets, which carries out rescue missions inside Syria, and that's what it's known for. But what Max pointed out is that it was founded by a British spy. It was basically run by the British government and its allies. And it was used, they only worked in areas that were controlled by militants. They worked hand in hand with jihadist groups, including Al-Qaeda. There's videos of them taking part in executions of Syrians. And they were used to basically manufacture public support for U.S. intervention. And they openly called for it. And they also openly called for sanctions, which is a weird stance for a humanitarian group to openly call for not just bombing, but sanctions on a country. And Max reported critically on them and pointed out all these shady things about them, including the fact that they were founded by a British spy, this guy, James Le Mercier, who former British spook, worked in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, worked as a jailer of Palestinian prisoners in the occupied territories. Not exactly the resume of a humanitarian.
Right.
And just recently, he took his own life late last year. And just recently, there was a report that showed that he was corrupt, that he was getting paid something like 24,000 euros a month. He was taking money that was supposed to be going to pay Syrian rescue workers. And he had 3 houses. He had a villa on a Turkish island, like a luxury apartment in the Netherlands, and another apartment in Turkey. And so Max's whole thing was that the White Helmets were basically a part of a scam operation to manufacture support for regime change. And now we know that part of the scam was incredibly lucrative for the Western operatives who were running it. So, and yet you look, and Max pointed this out, you look at the media, is anybody acknowledging this? Like White Helmets, like they won awards. They were there was a documentary about them that won an Oscar. Is anybody reporting that their founder was nakedly corrupt and taking money that was supposed to be going to Syrian rescue workers? No. And it speaks to the level of manufactured consent on this issue.
Yeah. So they resolved, because I think at the time of the interview that we did with Max, it wasn't clear what happened to him, I believe. Yeah. But then they determined it was suicide.
Turkey says it was suicide, and I have no way to know. I'm not there, and he was involved in some shady things, so like anything's possible. But yeah, the Turkish police said it was suicide, but Turkey is not. I don't necessarily take what the Turkish authorities say on faith either.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, this guy was corrupt, and yet he was used for a really cynical operation to under the guise of being humanitarian. And they definitely did some rescue missions. I mean, like that part is not fake. They did do a service. These areas were being bombed, and they saved people's lives. But they were in parallel. They were working with jihadist groups who were killing Syrians in these areas, and they were used to manufacture support for regime change. And it's just it speaks to what we're talking about. This like like exploiting people's best intentions of wanting to support humanitarian missions and save people's lives to justify a murderous proxy war.